I'm Amanda Leitner, and welcome to Rochester Rising, where we amplify the stories of Rochester entrepreneurs. Welcome to episode 131 of the podcast today. So today I had the great pleasure to sit down with Scott Snyder, the CEO of Geneticure. So Geneticure is a Rochester-based business. They operate in the precision medicine space, and they're getting ready to commercialize their first test for hypertension patients. So Scott was one of the first people I ever interviewed, ever. So it was really great to sit down and talk with him again about 4 years later and see how both of us have grown. So today on the podcast, we talk with Scott about Geneticure, how the company has grown over the past 4 years, what obstacles they faced in their growth, and why they're looking forward to continue to operate their business in Rochester. This podcast is brought to you today by Allsbrook Accounting. Allsbrook Accounting is Rochester's entrepreneurial financial service provider. Their local team provides experienced accounting, bookkeeping, tax prep, and advising at extremely affordable rates to help entrepreneurs and businesses of all sizes launch smart and grow fast. You can contact Allsbrook Accounting today at 931-841-4937 or find them at www.allsbrookaccounting.com for a free consultation to get your business off the ground and on track for growth. And you can find links to their website in our show notes. All right, so now on to the podcast today with Scott Snyder, CEO of Geneticure. All right, so we're here today with Scott Snyder, CEO of Geneticure, a Rochester-based medical startup company. So yeah, thanks for being here, Scott. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Amanda. It's fun to be back.
Yeah, I remember when we first met, I was trying to think of when that was when I was preparing for this. And we were working on Life Science Nexus, which is like 2 iterations before. So it was probably like 6 years ago, I think. Maybe not. Maybe 4 or 5.
A little less than that. I remember where we chatted, but I can't remember the time. I'm sure I could find it in my calendar somehow. But
I know it's like some random coffee shop on the UMM campus.
You were the first person to write about us.
Really? So, yeah. I didn't know that.
And yeah, we were excited. We're still excited that you are. So
I do remember it was just 3 people at the time, and I was looking yesterday when I was prepping, and there were at least, I met Monica before once just in passing, so I knew that you had expanded to at least 4 people, but then when I was looking, you have, I'm not sure how many now.
There's about 12 involved.
Okay.
Some full-time, some kind of contractor work, but yeah, 12 in total, I think, is the latest number. We started with 4 co-founders, and have grown from there.
So I guess to start, for people listening, so what is Geneticure kind of at a high level, and what are you trying to achieve with the company?
Sure. Well, Geneticure's premise is built on the fact that we think large diseases and dangerous diseases can be better treated by using genetics to guide medicine and therapy. So there are clues in your DNA that will predict how you respond to certain medications and therapies. And we've reached a point where it's now more cost-effective and leads to better outcomes by using genetics versus trial and error for diseases. So we fall into the bucket of personalized medicine, precision medicine, pharmacogenomics specifically. It's often called pharmacogenetics and so on. So there's a couple different words used to describe it.
So when you were building this product, what real market need and opportunity, what need did you see for this product in changing medicine?
Yeah. So the biggest need is that it's a difficult one because when you're pushing out into something that's never been done before, a lot of people don't think that a need exists because we've done okay without it this far. But when it comes to diseases like high blood pressure, which is our first product, we predict what medicines you're likely to respond to in hypertension. We're not doing okay right now, and so there just hasn't been any other tools available for doctors to use other than trial and error. And so there wasn't really this well-known unmet need, but as you dig into the disease and talk to people that have it, and look at the stats behind it, there's an obvious unmet need because it's the largest disease in the U.S., affects about 100 million people just in the U.S., and it's very poorly controlled. Only 50% have it under control, and it's the leading preventable cause of death in the world. But it's also symptomless and painless, and so what happens is that it doesn't quite get the attention that it probably deserves, and there's really only one way to treat it today before we came along. And so all of those things led us to start there, not getting too into the science, but we're looking at diseases where trial and error is currently standard of care, and they have better technical names than trial and error, but they're considered algorithms. Start here. If that doesn't work, add this medication and so on. But it's essentially trial and error. And they all have varying responses to therapy. So kind of a bell curve response where I could give you a medicine and it could really help you, or it could do nothing, or it could cause your condition to get worse. And then we're obviously looking at large markets from a business standpoint. So not necessarily looking at a lot of rare disease right now, but these big chronic diseases that lead to a lot of wasted healthcare spending.
Yeah, absolutely. Because otherwise you're just trying one pharmaceutical, right? Seeing if it works, which I don't even know how long that would take. At least I would think at least 6 months to 9 months. I'm not sure. And then going on to the next one to, get your disease under control, which is not fun for anybody, including the insurance providers.
Exactly. And the fascinating thing about hypertension particularly is that it doesn't have any symptoms, so there's very little incentive for the patient to continue down that road, and especially in markets that are underserved, so populations that don't have as good of access to care or don't have the means to take 5 half days off of work to go to the doctor to titrate a medicine that's not working. If they're not feeling any pain, then they screw it. I'll eat better. I'll exercise, and these become the stroke and heart attack statistics down the road because it's such a silent killer, kind of thing.
Yeah, I think your biggest competitor is always status quo, right?
Yeah,
if something's not that big of a pain point, then it's really hard for people to change.
Right.
So absolutely. So do you want to talk about your products that Geneticure has, how they work, and does it have to come through a physician, or can people order them from you?
Yeah, really good questions. First and foremost, yes, a physician's always involved. So we built the company and our approach with a couple of kind of core philosophies. One is that we would always have scientific evidence around the clinical utility, the health economic utility in the product. So it's better, but is it cheaper for the overall system? And then the third, really, that we don't want to replace physicians. We believe our company is built by physicians and PhDs, and we recognize that they are the center of care. We're just another tool in the belt to better treat disease. So similar to any other diagnostic, there are so many other things involved with the patient that we don't collect information on. We're only looking at certain sites in the genome that are functional for these things that we know relate to hypertension. We're not looking at the way diseases are predicted, so your susceptibility for a disease. And we always have a physician oversight, physician ordering, so that we're not direct to consumer. And we don't collect and share any data, and we destroy the DNA when we're done. So we're kind of built on those philosophies. But how it works is you're one of two types of patients using hypertension. Again, you've already been diagnosed, and you've been down this path of trial and error, and you're at or near a goal. So in hypertension, it's 120/80. Those are the two numbers, systolic and diastolic blood pressures. These are your goals. You're near there, but you might be on one or more medications that are counterproductive. And the way the standard of care works is that you start on one medication, then your doctor will add a second one. Whether or not the first one was really helpful or not, they stack the medications. So we have the potential for about 50 million Americans that have hypertension to pull medicine out of their current regimen. The second way it works is you've been newly diagnosed, and doctors will use our test to get you on the right one right away. So rather than 9 months of trying drugs A and B, your doctor might jump right to C. And then, the other big population, there's about 5 million of those diagnoses every year. And then there's another 50 million that have been diagnosed but aren't under control. So these are the ticking time bombs for payers and employers and families. And millions of these patients have started doing stuff and then probably stopped because they didn't feel any pain or they were getting a side effect from their medicine. So we have the potential to get them back on track. And tactically, it's a cheek swab, so you can either collect it yourself, use your scrub. It's called a buccal swab, one inside of each cheek. We just collect the cells in your cheek. It gets put into a little tube, and then it goes to the lab, and we look at these sites in your DNA. So we're looking at SNPs, which are actually sites within a gene that we know what they do, and then we combine that raw genetic data. It goes into our software and our algorithm, and it weights and plays these genes against each other in terms of ranking and importance and functionality. And your doctor gets a report then that they use to make changes.
Yeah, so basically you're looking at really specific pieces of DNA to decide how people will respond to drugs, right?
Exactly.
So I used to have to look at SNPs all the time. Glad I don't have to do that anymore. Was not my favorite thing to do. So you talked about it a little bit in the beginning, but do you want to talk about kind of the 4 co-founders that came on in the company? Your brother's one of them, and how the idea for Geneticure came about.
Eric's my brother. He really kind of led the charge and was relentless on not dropping the idea. So I was the slow, planning, meticulous entrepreneur. I was the only business person. I was also the source of capital originally. So I dragged my butt probably way too long. But Eric is a physiologist. We both grew up in Rochester. He was at the time at the University of Arizona, collaborating with a molecular geneticist, Ryan, and they were looking at some other diseases in pharmacogenomics, and along with a third scientist who's here at Mayo. His name's Tom Olson, and Tom works in cardiology at Mayo. He's a PhD. So we had cardiology, integrative physiology expertise, and genomics, and then the token business person.
You always need a business person.
Yeah. And, we'd start with a casual phone call, and then it was we actually had agendas, and then we had you owed something to the group to produce as this idea kind of matured. And then with enough butt kicking from my wife, I finally made the leap and started it full time.
Awesome.
Yeah.
It's good to have a supportive spouse.
Absolutely. Yeah. Critical, I would say. Yeah.
And now you said you have 10 to 12 people?
About 12.
Okay.
We're probably more heavy on the science side of the team, but that's by design. We're a scientific company. We're starting to move more into the biz dev and, commercialization side, but we have some great advisors. David Herbert from Mayo Clinic holds some great leadership roles in the business world at Mayo Clinic, is our EVP of strategy now. He's deeply involved. We have the scientist I mentioned, Monica, who is in the Twin Cities, and she is incredible talent. She's done all of our regulatory work, our CLIA licensing, and then obviously a lot of the research that we've done. Her ultimate passion is in oncology, and so we're looking at some things down the pipeline in that space. And then Ben, who's a Rochester native here, is a key player, and he is on the business development side and has been really helpful to me, and especially early on raising capital and things like that were new to me. Yeah.
So I know you have some offices here, above Grand Rounds in the Vault, and then you were in the Business Accelerator, right, as well? And then you also have a presence in Minneapolis. So is it more business here and science in Minneapolis, or
it's a mix of both?
Okay.
I mean, the other one that I was going to mention was Carl Jepson, who really runs the office here, runs the operations side of things. a lot of different hats we all wear, but Carl is kind of the operations lead on the whole thing, and this is considered a dry lab here in Rochester.
Okay.
So yeah, it's a mix of both, and in today's world, we have a pretty active team member in LA with all the tools available.
Yeah.
It was almost weird that we had to pick a headquarter because I'm in the Twin Cities, but at some point you have to, like, people want a mailing address
right.
and like these things that go with a company. But like, so we went back and forth. Was it going to be up there? Is it down here? For a lot of reasons, we decided it should be here. And then we graduated from the accelerator and took a really kind of cool small office above Grand Rounds. But for the most part, I'd say we're a virtual company. I mean, almost all of our meetings are held virtually, collaboration virtually, which is kind of the way to fly now. You can save so much capital by doing that.
Oh yeah, even people in Rochester sometimes won't drive to the other side of Rochester. Right. They'll get on, which is kind of ridiculous, but that's a whole nother a whole nother rabbit hole to go down. But yeah, so for you personally, like you said, your wife really kind of pushed you into doing this full time. You were in a lot of different leadership positions at Target. What has this kind of transition been like for you to go in kind of that corporate business world to working on a startup and working on a startup with a sibling?
Yeah. I mean, it's wild. I couldn't have done it without a supportive partner at home, and also supportive, ex-bosses in my old world around Target. I knew that they were so supportive that if I fell on my face here, I could always go back and just pick up where I left off. And it got to the point where the promise was so big about what we could do that the risk for not doing it outweighed the risk for doing it by a mile. And so there was no choice. I had to do it. The trade-off or the difference in working environment is night and day. Target's a pretty entrepreneurial corporation. So there's, when I was a Target employee, I had a lot of entrepreneurial roles running P&Ls and businesses. Then I flipped out to the vendor side of Target, and it was the same. You're still building businesses, and there's entrepreneurship involved, but the pillars of bureaucracy and getting things done quickly was always the challenge, because Target moves really fast. But like small entrepreneur companies work crazy fast.
Yeah.
So instead of waiting for now internal stakeholders to get done what I want to get done, now I find myself waiting for external stakeholders, whether it's investors or strategic partners or vendors of ours. The waiting is still the hardest part, because you want to go. But I don't think I'd ever go back to the corporate world. Maybe someday, but this life is just way more fun. The ups are higher and the downs are lower. And if you have the stomach for that, then it's the only way to fly. But that's the really real challenge. It's just kind of that roller coaster of the thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And imagine that's what most people say. It would be really hard to go back to a corporate environment or a large organization after doing. I mean, especially here in Rochester, there's so many other. The unemployment rate is so low. Everyone's always hiring, so it's like, it might not be the best thing, but at least you can get some kind of side hustle.
Yeah. To
make some money and pay your bills while you're exploring.
And the stuff you learn building a company, building a business, whatever it is. Bringing that back into a company, I think about how much better I could be as an employee now that I've done this thing for a few years. Like, the fearlessness, being able to break down walls, and like, you kind of get into a comfortable spot when the paycheck is just going to come every 2 weeks, and there's going to be, how much it's going to be, and
right.
And versus like, kind of fighting for your life, you build a lot of new skills.
Yeah, absolutely. And Geneticure has been running for 4 or 5 years at this point?
Yeah, officially probably about 4.5, almost 5, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's really exciting.
It's wild.
It's like you were saying in the beginning, you and your brother both have, and Ben, I believe you said, have really strong roots in Rochester. You guys graduated from John Marshall, right? And your brother got his PhD here at Mayo. So, and now you're partly in Minneapolis and other areas, but why did you want to have a presence here in Rochester? Why is that important for what you're trying to do?
Yeah. So for a while, it was just me battling my brother. Then I got outnumbered because, there was other people here, and Carl, even though he went to Mayo, he's important to us. We give him a hard time for that all the time. But, I think Rochester has a lot of the benefits of a really big city without a lot of the drawbacks. Even Ben, Monica, and I in the Twin Cities, I'm on the west side, Ben's far east, Monica's in the middle. We never see each other. And if the three of us were in Rochester, we could collaborate a lot more, but just getting around is just one of the biggest barriers. Rochester has so much support for entrepreneurship that we wanted to be a part of. You guys here, DMC, the growing kind of community of entrepreneurship here, we saw as exciting. There's a lot, even though you have all these benefits of kind of a smaller city, there's still a lot of diversity, which is really important to us. Diversity of thought and people. So the Rochester won out overall, and it's a quick drive for us to get down here, and so it's been fun. I'm glad we chose Rochester.
And you work above a brew pub, so
That's
what
right.
could really there's really no downfall to that.
Yeah, we haven't taken nearly the advantage of that I thought we would, but someday.
Summer's
exactly.
Summer's a whole different beast. Then
Right on.
You can take some time. Don't have to get in the car. Yeah, Summer's always an awakening here in Rochester.
Yeah.
So I guess kind of along those lines, where we're building Geneticure with your team, especially in the early phases, or even maybe now when you're scaling, what kind of obstacles did you have to overcome? What lessons did you have to learn that were maybe things you didn't come across in Target, or certainly in the science world we don't come across?
The biggest one is in the corporate world, you can get by with the "that's not my job" thing, and that's complete BS in a small company. Like, there's no such thing as "that's not my job." I've helped with research as a business person. I've helped with scientific papers, reviewing. The scientific folks have helped with the sales cycle, biz dev, capital raising. So that's probably the biggest challenge, is getting people to wear all the hats. Fundraising is great, but it's also torturous. Eventually, it really forces you to be a better messenger of what you're doing, but it gets old after a while, and it can be really disheartening at times when you're hearing no more than you think you should be, or you're getting ghosted by people, and it's like, well, but if you dwell on it and whatever, then it's just, you go into a black hole. So that you're not going to find probably in the corporate world. There are times in my corporate life where I wanted to get something done, and I had to go, you have to go sell it and take partners, but it's nothing like raising capital. When you're asking people to part with their money, that's a different ballgame.
Yeah. Are you doing angel rounds or VC, venture capital?
A little bit of both. Gravitating more now towards the venture stuff, but it's and then some strategic, corporate and strategic investors, mm-hmm. which are actually, so they all have their strengths and weaknesses, I guess, and pros and cons. But I will say that we're now getting to the point where we're talking to people that understand before we sit down what we're doing, mm-hmm. and that makes it so much easier, because we don't have to start with 101 and like, okay, so you have DNA in your body, right?
Right.
We're now jumping to the women and men who have maybe a portfolio of companies like ours, and they get it right away. And they get why we're different right away, because there's other personalized medicine companies out there, and they understand the nuances of our approach.
Yeah, and we've been talking about that a lot recently, and I think it's a good thing that there are more companies in Rochester looking to raise, angel
Mm-hmm.
and venture funds. But yeah, it's a different kind of investor. It's not a typical, I mean, we'll say Silicon Valley because everyone says Silicon Valley,
Yeah.
but something that's going to be, a fast go to market and return.
Yeah.
That's not how it goes. So, just navigating that, understanding it, and educating the investors along the way is just a whole completely different ball game.
Yeah, there's some very sophisticated angels in Minnesota, and there's a fund here in Rochester that's
Yep.
very sophisticated. There's some that are not sophisticated, and but in individuals, there's a lot of individual angels that you just didn't know were here, and family offices, and they all move at different speeds and have different strengths, but. We have not yet had to go, to the Valley much. We do have one VC out there who's been great, but yeah, it's been primarily Midwest for the most part.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, the Midwest, especially Minnesota, is medical alley for a reason.
Yeah.
And we have the Rise of the Rest presence here, and the venture fund here, and more interest. So I think it's definitely changing, at least from a semi-outside perspective from mine, but I hear
Sure.
what's happening.
Yeah. We learn about new funds and new angel groups and funds every day that I have, I gotta get them on the list and just introduce myself, but yeah, they're popping up all over the place.
Yeah. I'm actually just auditing Brad Feld's venture deals class right now, and
cool.
the book. I'm almost finished with the book. It's not very exciting, but I don't think legalese and all that kind of stuff really is. But it's interesting just to know the thought process that goes into it and how venture funds are structured and who they report to and what goes into that discussion or
and
consideration.
What they're, like you said, what their goals are helps you going into it that. Maybe it's not for everybody, and I think there's a lot of misconception that's changing now that people realize you don't have to raise venture capital to have a great business.
Yeah.
There's the type of businesses that VCs want to invest in may not fit your profile, and that can be great. There's altogether probably too much focus on financing and fundraising, but
Agreed. That's usually when I work with teams, that's their second question they ask is, how do I reach investors? And I'm hold on. What are we talking about here? And do we even have a product?
Yeah.
And usually it's no.
Yeah.
So it's we're getting about 25 steps ahead of where we actually are in the process. So I guess along those lines, while you guys are growing and in this phase that you are in now, what resources in terms of even human capital and just really anything in the ecosystem here has been useful for you, and what have you found that's missing as well?
Yeah, I mean, the things that we found to be useful are, there's actually plenty of investors in and around this area. Southern Minnesota, Twin Cities, you hear a lot about lack of capital, and I don't think that's necessarily true. Like you said, it might not be a fit for everybody, or you might not have something worth financing. So that's not really been an issue, I don't think, for the most part. In terms of resources that we found to be useful, it's the human capital for sure. In Rochester, we've had a lot of inbound interest to join our team. It's so hard to say we don't have a spot for you yet, but we will, and stay tuned. But we're getting to that point now where we're starting to look at bringing on a lot more people. Other than that, we haven't found, any real big roadblocks from being here. And the supportive side of things has been great. I mean, the people and the I'd say this network is obviously smaller than the Twin Cities, but it's much tighter knit. Medical Alley is somewhat of an exception because that's just a great organization throughout the whole state. But, we have these big, broad networks in the Twin Cities, but here it's different. It's just much snugger,
Yeah, completely
and supportive
agreed.
across fields too. So in the Twin Cities, the med tech entrepreneurs tend to fly together, and then the SaaS entrepreneurs tend to fly together. And here, it's you guys just support entrepreneurship. It doesn't matter if you're a coffee shop or a biotech or anywhere in between or whatever. You want entrepreneurs to succeed, which is really cool.
I think we're too small yet to be segmented.
Yeah,
so we could all stick
sure.
together. And there's just so much, like developers, for example, people at Mayo come out with a great app, where are they looking to get that developed out in the community usually. Yeah. So, those connection points are so key. And we're even in, it's almost been 3 years since I've been back here. I've noticed a huge, obviously, we have buildings coming up and things, this didn't exist or was just a germ of, more than a germ of an idea at that point. It was under development, the building, but it's changing slowly, and it's still like a cultural shift because we're still, you would argue that, or I would argue that entrepreneurship and small business still isn't really at the forefront in Rochester. Right. And then today you're here in town for the NPR's, I'm not actually sure the actual title of it. Basically, it's talking about medical entrepreneurship in Rochester, right? Yeah. So that should be really exciting. I think they'll have a really good turnout.
Yeah, I'm excited to see how it goes.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
We're kind of at the point. We've been intentionally quiet for a while, and so it's good to get our when we're at the point now where we want people to know what we're up to, because we think we can impact a lot of lives at this point. So, but again, we spent 4 years building evidence, and so we're proud of what we built, and now we want to tell people about it.
It's the natural next step in the cycle, right? But I think along the lines of what you were talking about too, going back to, even providing jobs, whether it's now or in the future, whenever I was getting done with my PhD here, and, certainly your brother, there weren't any other opportunities outside of Mayo here in Rochester for that kind of job. And like what you guys are providing with like Viryad and Imanis and totally blanking on... There's a bunch. Sonics, Mill Creek. Mm-hmm. There's just more opportunities that didn't exist 3 years ago for really technical jobs here. Yeah.
I think a lot of people want. It's different, at least with probably the generation after me, that where entrepreneurship is like a focus pretty early on. I spent a good 10 years in a career in corporate before doing it, but kids are coming out of college wanting to work for startups and small companies now. And a lot of those people might have been brought here by a spouse that's going to be at Mayo forever. They're going to be a lifer. That's fantastic, but they're landing here with all these skills that they need to put to work and that companies can benefit from.
Absolutely. So, or can we give them the tools to build something themselves? That's the other thing.
For sure.
I think we can. We just have to get better at connecting people.
Yeah.
So that was my last question for you. Awesome. I'll just ask if there's anything else you want to add to the story, and what's the best way for people to find out more about what Geneticure is doing besides coming to your talk tonight?
Hopefully. Our story is a complex one, and we barely scratch the surface on the technology. There's a lot of resources on our website at geneticure.com. geneticure.com. On the provider tab, so we kind of have a tab for patients, providers, employers. On the provider tab, towards the bottom, we list a lot of our evidence. Presentations that we made at conferences, peer-reviewed literature, and so on. So if you're into the technical side of things, that's a place that you can learn a lot about us. And Twitter at Geneticure is probably the only other spot that you'll find us really vocal.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for your time today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was fun.
All right, thanks so much to Scott for being on the podcast today and sharing his story. Check Geneticure out at their website and learn more about what they're doing. And you can find links to their website in our show notes as well. So if you're an avid listener of the podcast, you own a business out there, consider becoming a sponsor of the Rochester Rising podcast. So you can message us for more details, send us an email at rochesterrising@gmail.com to learn more about advertising on our podcast or on any of our other mediums that we have out there. And you can also find us on our website at rochesterrising.org. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter. under the handle at Rochester Rising, or on Instagram with the handle at Rochester Rising _MN. And we are also on YouTube. So check us out any of those places on the web. All right, that's a wrap for our podcast today. Thanks so much for tuning in to the podcast. Be sure to subscribe to us on iTunes or wherever you listen into your podcasts so that you never miss a story of entrepreneurship or innovation coming out of Rochester, Minnesota. We'll see you here next week with a brand new episode.